So today's lesson, we're going to focus on deductions, and the two deductions that we're going to focus on are EI premiums, your employment insurance premiums, and CPP premiums. So what you contribute to the Canada Pension Plan. So we've discussed these topics. EI, employment insurance, is generally used for people who are unable to work because they lost their job, so they're between jobs, or perhaps they were injured at work and they're unable to provide for their family. So this is kind of like protection against those situations. Canada Pension Plan is for people aged 60 and above. You can start collecting as early as age 60, okay? And you can defer that to age 70, but the idea there is to kind of protect the retired people. So when you're retired, you're not working, and you have no income coming in, this supplements that. You have the Canada Pension Plan to rely on. Quebec does something called QPP, the Quebec Pension Plan. We don't have to worry about that. We don't live in Quebec. But know that on every paycheck you get, you don't just receive your gross earnings. You don't just receive the amount of money that you earned. The government takes CPP and they take an amount of your check for employment insurance to protect you or to pay you a little further down the road. We'll talk about federal and provincial taxes. That money that comes off your check, your gross pay, goes towards healthcare and infrastructure and education, okay, and roads and these kind of things. We'll talk about those tomorrow. But we're going to start into the process of calculating net pay. So we're going to go from gross pay, what you earned, to net pay, what you actually take home. So here's a little cartoon. Mr. Gross, he's big. Okay, that's what you actually earn. Mr. Net, he's nice and thin. All right, that's what you actually take home. So your gross pay is always going to be more than your net pay, or bigger than your net pay. So net pay, the definition, the money paid to an employee after deductions. A lot of times people call it your take-home pay. We'll talk about the CPP. So here's some information on the Canada Pension Plan. All right, there's also some information here. This is old. Okay, know that these rates change frequently, year to year. Maybe it's still 5.25. I think the current rate is actually 5.95. If I look here, yeah, the current rate is 5.95. And as I said, there's now something called the enhanced CPP. We're just going to go with the old school calculation of what it was prior to 2024. But basically, the premise is there, okay? Know that the government is taking money off each of your checks, or anyone who has a job, the government takes an amount of money and they put it into this pool for the Canada Pension Plan, and then we can receive it when we age out of the workforce, when we're nearing retirement. We can start collecting it as early as 60 years old. The current rate now is 5.95%. This slide goes from, or it says 5.25%. As I said, the idea behind the Canada Pension Plan is to protect those who are, what's going on here? Why am I froze up? Retired. So here's the actual calculation. So here's the math behind the CPP. Here's how you figure out what the government is taking off your check and putting into the CPP, the Canada Pension Plan. Your allowable exemption is $3,500. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this number, okay, and that'll be for everyone, and you're going to divide it by the number of checks you receive. So if you get paid weekly, you would take $3,500 and divide it by what? How many checks would you get in a year if you were paid weekly? 52. Wicked. What if you were paid bi-weekly? I'd go $3,500 divided by 26. What if you're paid semi-monthly? I'd go 3,500 divided by 24. And what if you're paid monthly? I divide it by 12. So you will have to understand the pay frequency for each individual. After you do that, you're going to go 3,500 divided by the number of pay periods. Then you're going to subtract that from their gross pay. So whatever you get in step one, you subtract it from their gross pay. And that will give you another answer. And then you're going to take that number and you multiply it by the CPP rate. This number changes. Okay? At the time these slides were made years ago, it was 5.25%. What is it currently? 5.95%. So know that the rates are going to change. So I wouldn't multiply my answer from step 2 by 0.0525. If I was doing a question today, I'd multiply it by 0.0595. Fair? I'll say this, whatever the worksheet says or whatever your textbook questions say, go with that rate, use that rate. When you get a question on a test or a quiz, I will provide a CPP rate and an employment insurance or an EI rate. So here we go. It says you need to calculate the Canada Pension Plan deduction for Amanda, whose pay statement is shown here. In 2020, the CPP contribution rate was 5.25%. So that's 6 years ago. Of any gross earnings above $3,500. So we look at the pay stub. Here's a pay stub for Amanda. Doesn't give a last name. Doesn't tell us where she works. It goes from 0308 2011 to 0315 2011. How often does she get paid? Does she get paid monthly? Does she get paid bi-weekly? Does she get paid weekly? Does she get paid semi-monthly? Weekly. Okay? Nice. And it says that right here as well. So that tells me that in step 1, I am going to divide the 3,500 by how much? 52. So here's what you should do for step 1. And you all have this slide. You should take the 3,500, which is the allowable exemption for everyone, and you're going to divide it by 52. And what does that give me? What's 3,500 divided by 52? $67.31. Fair? Now, what does it say to do from step 2? It says to subtract the exemption, so that's this number right here, from the gross pay. What's your gross pay? How much does she earn a week? Right here. Here's the gross earnings right here. It's $500. And what am I going to do? Subtract what? This answer right here, $67.31. And when I do that, that's going to leave 69 cents. And I'd have 432. So 500 minus 67.31, 432.69. Okay? That doesn't mean they're going to take $432.69 off of every one of my checks. That'd be crazy. If I only make $500 a week and they take that much. What do I do with this number now? And they're not taking 67.31. I take the 432.69 and I'm going to multiply it by the CPP rate. What is the CPP rate for this particular question in 2020? 5.25%. So do I write 5.25%? What should I do with that percentage? Change it to a decimal. So I'm going to multiply it by 0.0525. And when I do that, this is what I end up for my final amount. $22.72, rounded to the nearest cent. And that right there, this amount, would go in this box right here. Okay? They're going to take $22.72. That's going to come off my check. So I'm not going to get $500. I'm going to get $500 less $22.72. And I'm also going to contribute to the employment insurance. So today's focus will be this and this. Tomorrow's focus will be the federal and provincial tax. Okay? And then I would total up all of these deductions and subtract it from the gross earnings 500. All I wanted to do in that particular question was figure out the CPP contributions. We're not worrying about the enhanced CPP. It wouldn't apply to this person if they only make $500 a week. 500 times 52, they're only making $26,000 a year. They would be well below the threshold of $74,600 for the enhanced CPP. Okay? They're not making over $75,000. All right. That's how you do CPP calculations. This number, folks, won't change in step one. It's 3,500. This number will change. What will the 52 be? What would it go to if I'm paid bi-weekly and not weekly? 26. Other frequencies are semi-monthly, 24, or monthly, 12. So you have to read the question carefully or read the pay stub carefully. Okay, here's an example for you to try. I'll pause it. Okay, I'm going to pause the video. Checking back in. So we start with the allowable exemption, $3,500. We're going to divide it by the number of paychecks she gets. So I'm looking for this. What did we say semi-monthly was? 24. If I divide 3,500 by 24, I end up with $145.83. They're not taking $145.83 off each check. What do I do with this number? Step 2. I subtract it from the gross pay. What's her gross pay? It says it right here. Zoe's gross is $2,650. And I'm going to subtract this answer, 145.83. 2650 minus 145.83 gives me $2,504.17. Would it make sense for them to take that much to contribute for the Canada Pension Plan? No, because Zoe would have only like $145 left. That's no good. What do I do with this number, the 2504.17? I'd multiply it by the CPP rate. What is the CPP rate? Should I write 0.525? No, that's 52.5%. Man, 525. And what do I get? How much are they taking off my check? $131.47. Seems like a lot, doesn't it? But what's the good news? Bad news is right now I can't, like, that money's gone. Good news is when I turn 60, I start to get a return. I start to get that money back. Everyone okay with the CPP contributions? This person would also not have to worry about the enhanced contribution because $26.50 gross pay times 24 paychecks only equates to $63,600. So they're still under that $74,600. So we don't have to worry about the enhanced contribution. It's just one amount, 131.47. EI rate. Employment insurance. What is employment insurance? It's a social program that contributes to the security of all Canadians by providing assistance to workers who lose their jobs, and it helps unemployed people across the country to get back to work. It helps seasonal workers, like we said, fishermen, okay, or construction workers, these kind of people who work, or supply teachers. They only work certain times during the year. The employment insurance rate at the time I made these slides was 1.63%. If we look, I think the current CP or EI contribution, what's the current? In New Brunswick. Still 1.63, but that rate can change too, okay? That rate can change as well. To do the employment insurance calculation, we actually just do 1.78% in this, or 1.63% of their gross earnings. So you don't have to worry about an allowable exemption or how many paychecks they get. For this particular question, I am just going to take the gross earnings, $500, and I'm going to multiply it by the CPP, the EI rate. What is the employment insurance premium? $1.78%. So to figure out your EI contributions, that's this box. I'm going to take the gross earnings, $500, and I am going to multiply it by 1.78% as a decimal. So at the time of this question, the employment insurance premium rate was 1.78%, not 1.63%. What's 1.78% as a decimal? And what does that leave? What's 500 times 0.0178? $8.90. That's not bad. Okay, like I can stand to give up $8.90. But what happens? The more you make, if this number gets bigger, that person or that worker contributes more. So they take more from the people who make more. The more you make, the more they take. $8.90 would go in this box. And that, in a nutshell, folks, is the lesson for today. Okay? EI contributions, it's just straight gross earnings multiplied by the EI rate. Just make sure you change that to a that percentage to a decimal. CPP is a little different. You got to take the $3,500 allowable exemption, so that will not change, divided by the number of checks they get, so 52, 26, 24, or 12. Take that answer, subtract it from the gross earnings, take that answer, and multiply it by the CPP rate. One last question. This one wants you to figure out both. Okay, it wants the CPP contribution and the EI contribution or deduction for Sam. How often is Sam paid? Weekly. What's the CPP contribution rate? 5.25%. So that's a little lower than the current rate. And what's the EI rate? 1.63. So if I want to do both of those things, here's the gross earnings. $1,962. That would also keep Sam under the threshold for the enhanced CPP. Step one, if I want to figure out the CPP contributions, this is what you should do. So put a little heading to let yourself know that you're calculating the CPP deduction or the CPP contribution. Step one, what's the numerator always equal? What's the allowable exemption? 3,500. Excellent. What are you going to divide that by? I did 52 in the first example and 24 in the second example. What am I going with this time? If they get paid weekly. 52 again. Wicked. Do you remember what 3,500 divided by 52 was? 67.31. Do you remember what I do with the $67.31? I subtract it from what? The gross earnings. Thank you. 1962 minus 67.31. That leaves $1,894.69. And then do you remember what I do with this $1,894.69? If I'm looking for the CPP deduction, which rate should I multiply it by? The 5.25% or the 1.63%? Which one's the CPP? 5.25. So I'm going to change that to a decimal. And what am I left with? $99.47. So how much are they going to take for CPP? $99.47. That's coming off this amount. How do I figure out the EI contribution or the EI deduction? Which number do I start with? Look at my last example. What did I start with? 500. What was the $500? The gross earnings. Okay. So what are the gross earnings for Sam? That figure right there, $1,962. And I'm just multiplying that by the EI rate. So not the 5.25%. What? 1.63. Wicked. So as a decimal, that's 0.0163. What are they taking for EI, employment insurance? 1962 times 0.0163 gives me $31.98. So they're taking this much for the Canada Pension Plan and this much for the employment insurance. Tomorrow we'll talk about federal and provincial taxes and how to figure those out. And then we'll start calculating net pay. Fair enough? You can go to work on the sheet that goes with your notes.